Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're venturing into the thought of A.H. Almaas, the originator of the diamond approach. We're focusing specifically on his book, Runaway Realization, Living a Life of Ceaseless Discovery.
That title really grabs you, doesn't it? Runaway.
It does. And you, our listener, actually brought some really compelling material to our attention, exploring this very idea, this, continuous unfolding understanding.
Yeah, it's a fascinating concept.
So our mission for this deep dive is pretty clear. What does it really mean to live a life of endless discovery, where, no single truth is the final word?
It's provocative right from the start. That idea of runaway, it implies something dynamic, something that just won't be pinned down.
Right.
And your sources dig deep into this. It really pushes against how we usually try to find stability, find that one solid ground.
Okay, so let's jump right in then. One of the first things Almaas points out is this very human thing, isn't it? Wanting to grab onto a single fixed truth.
Totally. We're always looking for that grand unifying theory.
Like the ultimate particle in physics, or maybe ultimate emptiness in spirituality. Something to anchor us.
Exactly. There's this deep desire for certainty, for the definitive answer. The thinking is, well, if we can just find that one ultimate reality,
then everything else just clicks into place.
Right. Think about the examples he uses, the Higgs boson, or absolute emptiness. They often get treated like the fundamental building blocks.
But here's where Almaas throws in a really interesting twist. He suggests this impulse, this need for one fixed unity, can actually, paradoxically, obliterate the particularity of each thing. It's like unity stops being this rich tapestry and becomes just sameness. Everything loses its unique flavor.
That's such a crucial point.
Yeah.
If you try to cramp everything into one box, you just lose the richness, uniqueness.
Right.
Like the book jokes, everything ends up tasting like chicken.
Yeah.
It's a trade-off, like Almaas says. We often give up that vibrancy, that individual expression, for what feels like solid, unchanging security. But maybe it's an illusion.
Which brings us to this really mind-stretching question he poses. What if reality isn't limited to just one ultimate answer? What if true unity actually includes all the particular bits? And freedom means never quite finding that final resting place, that final answer. It does stretch your brain a bit.
It definitely does.
Yeah.
And this is where he brings in the view of totality.
Okay.
So instead of fighting to find the single truth, this view validates all possible views. Dual, non-dual, theistic, scientific. You name it.
Without trying to mash them all together into one thing.
Exactly. It doesn't reduce them to just being variations of one core idea.
So that's a real shift from, say, perennial philosophy, that idea that all paths lead up the same mountain, just using different words.
Precisely. Perennial philosophy often sees them converging, right? But the view of totality respects the inherent validity of each perspective on its own terms.
Interesting.
No single viewpoint, no matter how big it seems, can possibly exhaust reality. Because as Almaas emphasizes, reality itself is fundamentally free. It can't be fully contained by any one system.
And that's where runaway realization really comes into play, isn't it?
Yes, that's the heart of it.
It's the idea that the real triumph is reality just living freely, moving from one insight to another, valuing that nimbleness of view over sticking to one fixed truth.
Exactly. It's a celebration of the unfolding itself. Freedom isn't about getting to some final truth destination.
It's the ability to shift, to hold different views, or maybe no fixed view at all.
Right. That fundamental openness is the engine behind all the different ways we can see things.
It makes me think a bit about Gödel's incompleteness theorem in math.
Ah, yes.
The idea that any system complex enough will have true statements you just can't prove within that system. Is Almaas doing something similar here with reality and thought?
That's a great connection. And he actually mentions Gödel directly in this context.
Oh, does he?
Yeah. He suggests that no matter how good our system of thought is, it's never going to capture all of reality.
Yeah.
Reality, like a complex system, always has truths, just beyond our current framework, always inviting more exploration.
So the takeaway for the listener might be, stop searching for the one complete answer, because reality itself keeps inviting you to discover more.
Beautifully put. It's an ongoing invitation.
Okay, so we're moving past this idea of a single ultimate truth. Now, Almaas also talks about how runaway realization kind of reframes the diamond approach itself, right? Puts it in context with other paths.
Yes, it does. It's like zooming out. Previous diamond approach stuff, as your sources mentioned, often laid things out more progressively, moving through ego, essential qualities, non-dual states.
A kind of step-by-step journey.
Right. This book doesn't say that's wrong,
Yeah.
but it places it all within a much bigger, non-hierarchical picture. It's a new lens.
And he uses this metaphor, turning the wheel of the teaching, borrowed from Vajrayana Buddhism, though he says it's not exactly the same.
That's the metaphor. Vajrayana is known for that rich symbolism and transformative focus.
Can you walk us through these turnings in the diamond approach context?
Sure. He outlines 4 broad movements. The first turning is mainly about the individual, realizing the soul, its essential nature, getting to know your own core quality.
Okay, sounds like that initial inner work, finding your authentic self.
Exactly. Then the second turning moves towards realizing the boundless nature of reality, that direct hit of unity, oneness, non-duality.
Ah, so that's where much of the earlier diamond approach teaching focused, like the journeys of ascent and descent.
That's right. Exploring the absolute, integrating it. That was a huge part of it.
So first two turnings cover a lot of what we might think of as awakening, initial realization. What about the third? This sounds different.
The third turning introduces the freedom vehicle. And this is radically different. It moves beyond even boundlessness and non-duality.
Beyond non-duality.
Wow. Almaas describes it almost like stepping into a parallel universe of understanding, a completely different viewpoint on realization itself. You're looking at the same reality, but from this totally new, unexpected angle, like seeing a familiar object, but from a dimension you didn't know existed.
Yeah. A parallel universe of realization. That's quite something. And the fourth turning, does it build on that?
Yeah. The fourth turning reveals the wisdoms that come from realizing the freedom vehicle. It shows that enlightenment isn't just stages on one line.
Like climbing a ladder.
Right. But that there are fundamentally different kinds of realization, different angles, different perspectives. And the view of totality itself comes out of this fourth turning.
It really sounds like it emphasizes how open-ended and, well, diverse reality and our understanding can be, not just one straight path to a finish line.
Precisely. It highlights that constant potential for discovery, the freedom of reality to show up in countless ways. It keeps inviting us to see more, understand deeper.
So for the listener, maybe the journey isn't about reaching an end, but just expanding the capacity to see and experience in new ways.
I think that captures it perfectly. It's about expanding capacity.
Now, this common idea, realization is the end goal. You get there, work's done, put your feet up. But Almaas totally flips that with living realization.
He absolutely does. Challenges that whole notion head on. The idea that realization is graduation day, you just are now, no more effort needed.
Right.
But from the perspective of realization itself, living is continual practice. It's active engagement.
So it's not about stopping practice, but the kind of practice changes.
Exactly. It's not just rote repetition. True practice from this realized view needs real intention, motivation from within, and this deep devotion to truth.
It becomes an expression of the realization.
Yes, it naturally expresses those qualities like deep curiosity, love, openness, steadfastness, even just enjoying reality.
So practice shifts from being a tool to get somewhere to being the ongoing expression of being there right here, right now.
Beautifully said. And as you mature in this, the sense of who is practicing also shifts. Big time.
How so?
Well, initially it feels very much like I am practicing my effort. But with more insight, you might realize it's the totality. It's what Almaas calls living being itself that's the real agent of practice.
Whoa. That's a huge shift. So what drives this continuous practice then, from that viewpoint, if you're not striving for a future enlightenment anymore?
He suggests it's this deep desire to live fully, to be free, to keep discovering the mysteries, to fulfill your life's purpose. It's intrinsic.
A natural unfolding.
Right. But he also adds a touch of urgency. Reminds us our individual time for learning is limited, even if life itself goes on.
So grab the moment. Recognize the potential in each instant for discovery.
Absolutely. Living each moment fully, authentically, without adding extra resistance or judgment that becomes total practice.
Okay.
It's embracing that paradox. Our effort and reality's spontaneous unfolding are totally tangled together.
This leads nicely into that idea of the enlightenment drive. We usually think we have a motive for enlightenment, but this sounds like something deeper, something already in reality.
Yes, exactly. The view from realization changes how we see practice. It's not just our effort to get enlightened anymore. Practice is always, fundamentally, an expression of the reality of realization. And as your realization deepens, maybe the form of practice changes. But the continuity is key. Life itself, lived consciously, becomes part of the practice.
And this needs a kind of maturation, a shift in why we do it.
Definitely.
Yeah.
You move from being driven by ego or external pressures to this more autonomous, intrinsic motive, something beyond the small self, a drive that's just there, deep inside.
He even points out the limits of selfless motivation, right? That even my selfless motivation has a subtle my in it.
That's such a sharp insight, isn't it? He suggests that as long as we feel practice needs a specific motive, even a noble one, we haven't quite tapped into the liberated enlightenment drive.
So the real liberation is when practice just happens, without needing a reason.
Yes, you just practice because, well, that's how things are. It's a natural movement towards reality, like breathing.
So it's not even about loving enlightenment or having compassion as the reason to practice, but recognizing practice as reality expressing itself. That's radical.
It is. Before that point, our love, our compassion, however real, can still be a kind of appropriation of that drive. We try to own it, make it ours. But real freedom is letting go of that ownership, letting practice just be the motiveless movement it is.
Okay, so how does this change our understanding of inquiry? We often think of inquiry as, actively trying to figure something out, find an answer.
Right. And Almaas points out that in inquiry practice, the aim shifts. It becomes about just seeing the truth of this moment without trying to steer it.
Not trying to change things or get a specific result.
Exactly. It's about wanting to see what's true right now, even if it's uncomfortable.
It means letting go of our ideas, our preferences, even our spiritual checklists about where we should be. That sounds tough.
It can be. We all have our likes and dislikes, our ideas about good states versus bad ones. But real inquiry means gently letting go of those aims, allowing the truth of the moment to unfold on its own terms.
He tells that story, doesn't he, about how his own understanding of cause and effect got flipped.
Yes, that's a powerful example.
Where he realized maybe the realization itself was causing the practice, generating the questions, the life situations.
Exactly. It shows how our usual linear thinking, I do X, therefore Y happens, can be too simple for these deeper dynamics. What feels like our effort leading to insight might actually be the insight approaching, manifesting as our questions are seeking.
So the approaching realization and our interest in it, they're like two sides of one movement, a dialectic communication, he calls it.
Precisely. It's not always A causes B. How things happen is bigger than simple causality. Many views can be true at once. And ultimately, from this deeper view, realization itself is uncaused. It arises from reality's nature.
This touches on that subtle point he makes about appropriation of practice, how the individual can, maybe unknowingly, take credit for what's really a spontaneous arising of living being.
Yeah, that's a really key subtle point. The soul can fall into thinking, my effort led to this realization. And in doing that, you accidentally grab ownership, not just of the drive, but the practice itself. The ego, the centered self, kind of hijacks the process from living being, limiting its possibilities.
It sounds like a very subtle self-centeredness. Even when we think we're being spiritual and selfless, we assume our dedication is making it happen.
Exactly. That belief in a separate self doing things gets tangled up with the idea that our actions cause realization. It's an easy trap.
But he does distinguish this from the healthy stage of owning your experience, right? Recognizing your realization as yours, particular to you. How does that work?
That's a crucial distinction. Owning your experience is vital for maturation. Acknowledging your understanding, your insights. It's your realization, not someone else's. That's healthy.
Okay.
But appropriation by the ego tends to narrow things, create separation, disconnect you from the source. True ownership is more like acknowledging where you are on the path, like owning a piece of art you appreciate it, learn from it. Appropriating it is like claiming you painted it.
Gotcha. So recognize it as deeply mine in experience, but not claiming I, as a separate self, caused and control it.
Precisely. That subtle difference is everything.
Which leads right into this idea of living being as the true agent, shifting from the individual self as the doer to something bigger.
Yes. Almaas presents this powerful view. The diamond approach itself arises through the practice of living being. The individual is like a channel, a vessel.
So when we're really practicing...
It's living being practicing through us. When insight comes, it's living being showing its clarity. When realization dawns, it's living being presenting its own nature.
So the insights, the discoveries, they aren't just coming from my mind or my effort. They're from this deeper source expressing through me.
Exactly. And not seeing that leads to that subtle self-centeredness. Appropriating the source, the activity, the realization itself, which just props up the limited individual self-idea. The view of totality helps us see beyond that, see the freedom of living being.
Now, the diamond approach is often seen as progressive, right? Unveiling things step by step. But runaway realization seems to tweak that view of the journey.
It does. Unlike some teachings that maybe try to give you the whole picture up front, the diamond approach often unfolded progressively. You move from one realization to another.
Right.
But this book marks a shift away from seeing it only as that linear journey of ascent and descent.
So not necessarily the sudden path idea, but more like realizing the journey doesn't actually end.
Exactly that. The moment you deeply get that the journey has no end, the whole idea of linear progress changes. It becomes one way to see things, but not the only way. The progressive unfolding was actually preparing us to see reality in these newer, more liberating ways. Almaas emphasizes that really learning about an aspect or dimension of being means, in a way, transcending your previous understanding of it. Reality always holds more possibilities than we thought.
It's like you get settled in one understanding, and then reality itself kind of nudges you or shoves you into something new, expanding the view.
That's a great way to put it. You might get really solid in non-duality, that oneness, and then boom, realization shifts to a totally different dimension, a different mode of experience. That dynamic movement is key to runaway realization.
Which brings us back to the core concept itself. How does Almaas define enlightenment through this lens of ceaseless discovery?
Well, from reality's own perspective, enlightenment is runaway realization. It's that continuous, spontaneous, joyful movement from one unique realization to another.
And each stage, aspect, dimension has its own value. No need to compare.
Exactly. Each is a valid manifestation. It's about developing the capacity to experience things directly from true nature's perspective, not just the limited self's view.
So realization just keeps generating more realization.
Yes. The old model of climbing through dimensions eventually breaks down in this bigger view of totality. It becomes more fluid, more dynamic, more free.
Now, to make things even richer and more complex, Almaas brings in this concept of total being. How does that fit with true nature, which we've talked about a lot?
That's a really interesting point. He acknowledges they overlap, but aren't identical. And he leaves it a bit ambiguous, intentionally, it seems.
Okay.
While true nature is seen as pure, free, just saying everything is always true nature doesn't quite explain why most of us don't experience it that way all the time.
Right, there's the rub.
So total being offers another angle. Almaas suggests Maybe it's total being itself that's experiencing a kind of ignorance, rather than blaming the individual for being flawed.
Because the individual is a manifestation of total being. They don't exist separately.
Exactly. So blaming the individual for not getting it is maybe inaccurate from that perspective.
It's a way to account for ignorance and suffering without pointing the finger at a separate self.
I think so. Total being includes everything. All time, all space, all forms, formlessness, the whole shebang. It highlights how non-exclusive we are.
So practice becomes realizing the freedom of total being.
Right.
Knowing whatever I am is total being and whatever I'm not is also total being.
Yes, it's like this infinite potential. It frees us from fixed definitions of self, of reality. It leads to freedom, not chaos.
But it's paradoxical, right? Every experience is total being, yet total being itself stays elusive.
Indeterminate.
Exactly. It's not a fixed thing or being. It's that liberating indeterminacy behind everything.
This raises that crucial question then.
Yeah.
What's the individual's role in all this? If total being is the context, what about me, the practitioner?
Well, even though non-dual realization might feel like the separate self dissolves into the totality, Almaas stresses the absolutely vital role of individual consciousness for realization to actually recognize itself. Enlightenment, in this view, kind of needs you as an individual point of awareness.
So even as expressions of this vast total being, our individual awareness is necessary for being to perceive its own enlightenment. That's fascinating. It is. There's this dynamic dialectical thing happening between the individual and being as a whole. It's more complex than just simple boundlessness or non-duality. They aren't totally separate, but they aren't just identical either. It's more mysterious, more co-creative.
Which brings us to that classic debate, practice versus grace. Do we earn realization through effort, or is it just a gift?
Almaas sees them as totally intertwined, a dynamic interplay. Some traditions lean heavily one way or the other.
Yeah.
Pure grace or pure effort, like some yoga paths.
Sure.
But the diamond approach sees them working together.
And how we experience our own soul can vary too, from ego to soul to maybe an organ of reality.
Exactly. You can experience yourself as the separate ego, or more refined individual soul, or as this intrinsic organ through which living being experiences itself. And realization is definitely yours as living being. But you can't fully appropriate it as belonging only to the limited individual self without creating disconnection.
So it's deeply mine, as my true nature's expression, but not something I, the separate self, possess or control or caused.
Precisely. Believing the isolated self owns and generates it is seen as a kind of cognitive error, a delusion that hides the way things really are.
Okay. Now, Almaas also talks about the logos of the teaching. What's that about? How does it connect to runaway realization?
The logos is like the inherent viewpoint, the intelligence, the wisdom baked into each aspect of true nature.
Okay.
As you experience and understand these aspects, you start to recognize their unique perspective on reality. He suggests all the wisdom of true nature is implicitly in any one aspect, but it's hard for us to unpack it all from just one.
So experiencing different aspects and wisdom vehicles helps build that bigger view of totality we discussed.
Exactly. Those two main journeys, ascent, realizing dimensions, and descent, integrating into life, they both contribute to unfolding this understanding. At first, your commitment to practice feels like you're doing. But as you mature, you see the arising of true nature itself as what's underneath, guiding the practice. And this can lead to what he calls runaway unfoldment, where being just takes over and unfolding happens on its own, often really intensifying things.
Wow. That sounds like a shift from striving and effort to more allowing, opening to what's unfolding.
It is. And that brings up the paradox of non-doing.
Yeah.
How do you not do while you're still practicing?
Yeah, how do you do that?
Inquiry becomes this delicate balance, right? Taking responsibility for exploring, but staying radically open to revelation.
Riding a razor's edge?
Exactly. Between active questioning and effortless stillness, inquiry itself becomes this revealing dynamism of realization.
And diamond meditation, is that related?
Yes, he describes that as true nature inquiring into itself, revealing its truth through openness and interest. And non-doing meditation, obsidian samadhi, helps that shift from concentration to effortless stillness and clarity. It supports spontaneous revelation.
So inquiry and non-doing aren't separate things in the end. They're complementary expressions of realization from the view of totality.
Precisely. Non-doing supports inquiry by stressing presence and non-interference. Inquiry cultivates the discriminating intelligence in being. Eventually, they just work together seamlessly.
Okay, let's bring this full circle back to freedom. How does this whole runaway realization understanding shed light on what freedom really is?
Well, Almaas says true freedom isn't about getting independent from being. It's realizing the freedom of being's own dynamic nature to manifest all its possibilities. Our liberation is tied up with the liberation of that dynamism.
So freedom is living fully as ourselves, while also recognizing and expressing the vastness, the potential of the being we are.
Exactly. It's an ongoing discovery, not a fixed state you achieve and hold on to. Freedom is implicit in every aspect of true nature.
Our first taste of freedom is often freedom from suffering, from patterns.
Right. But the deeper freedom is that inner knowing of reality, just as it is, no distortion.
And recognizing that needs intelligence. and maturation to handle more freedom.
Yes, exactly. Understanding one aspect of true nature naturally brings awareness of others, of more possibilities. That capacity of presence to discriminate transforms life into discovery, new dimensions of knowing, of being.
And more freedom leads to
More heart, more love, enjoyment, clarity, understanding in your actual life. Freely given, freely shared, no limits.
So the big takeaway from this deep dive into runaway realization is really that reality isn't static, it's the ceaseless unfolding. And our understanding needs to be dynamic too, embracing multiple views, not clinging to just one fixed truth.
Exactly. It's really an invitation to a lifelong adventure of discovery, limitless discovery.
As you reflect on this, listener, maybe consider what fixed beliefs or perspectives might be limiting your experience of reality's inherent freedom. And if you're intrigued, definitely check out more of A.H. Almaas's work and the Diamond Approach. Thanks so much for taking this deep dive with us.